Waitress held Vampire King's dying daughter, whispered one word. The child's eyes opened. Lanterns swayed on wrought iron posts, casting dim, trembling light over cobblestones slick with rain. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, deep and mournful, marking the hour when the veil between the mortal world and the shadowed lands grew thin. In a small tavern on the edge of the forest, Alara moved quietly among the tables. Her apron, once bright, had dulled from months of washing and constant use. She carried a tray of mugs, careful not to spill, careful not to draw attention. Life had been small, simple, and unremarkable for her, until tonight. The door burst open with a rush of wind, and a group of cloaked riders entered. Rain streaked down their dark robes, and their faces were hidden beneath hoods. Silence fell over the tavern as the crowd watched them. At the center, two men carried a small bundle wrapped in black velvet. The tavern seemed to hold its breath. The bundle moved slightly, a faint, trembling pulse that made Alara's heart ache. Something about it felt fragile. Alive, yet on the edge of leaving the world, she instinctively stepped forward, drawn toward the child. "Stay back," one of the riders barked, but there was fear in his voice, a desperation he could not hide. "She cannot be touched by mortals." Alara paused, her fingers trembling. "But she's alive," she whispered. "She needs someone." The rider hesitated, unsure. The child's face peeked from the velvet, pale as moonlight, with lashes so fine they seemed spun from silver thread. Her lips were parted in a silent plea, and her eyes, half closed, reflected the dim lantern light like tiny pools of starlight. The tavern grew cold, as if the very air knew something ancient had entered the room. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding. Dark robes clung to his broad shoulders, and his pale skin gleamed unnaturally under the lanterns. His eyes, sharp and golden, swept over Alara with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "You," his voice cut through the room like a blade. "Step away from her, mortal." Alara froze. She had heard stories of the Vampire King, Werewolf, who ruled the northern lands with a power both feared and whispered about in secret. And here he was, standing before her, alive, real, and terrifying. Yet despite the fear curling in her chest, she could not turn away. Something in the child's faint heartbeat called to her, something no fear could silence. "She's dying," Alara said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "If you don't let me help, she won't make it." Veilric's eyes narrowed. His gaze was like ice on fire, piercing through her. "Mortals have no power over life or death in my realm," he said, his tone low, almost a growl. "Leave her to me, or I will not be kind." Alara's chest tightened, but she did not retreat. Something in her, perhaps foolish courage, perhaps instinct, drove her forward. She knelt beside the child, feeling the faint, fluttering pulse against her palms. It was so small, so fragile. Her heart ached with a longing she did not fully understand. "Live," she whispered, barely audible. The words slipped from her lips like a prayer, a hope, a command. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the child's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, delicately, she opened her eyes. It was not a simple blink. It was as if the child's gaze reached out, brushing against the corners of Alara's soul. And in that instant, Veilric stiffened, his hand moving instinctively to his chest. His golden eyes widened, flickering with an emotion he had not felt in centuries. "How?" Veilric began, but no words came. He felt something shift, a force he had neither invited nor understood. Alara, holding the child, felt it too, a strange warmth, a faint pulse of life that seemed to sing in the very air around them. The tavern, once filled with whispers, went completely silent. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as if waiting. The child, small and delicate, looked up at Alara with a clarity that startled her. There was understanding in those eyes, a spark that went beyond mere survival. Leora, though the child did not yet speak, was alive, and something ancient and powerful stirred in the room. Veilric's lips pressed into a thin line. His anger warred with curiosity. He stepped closer, the shadows bending slightly around him as if the darkness itself obeyed his presence. "You dared to touch her," he said, his voice softer now, laced with something dangerous. "You mortals meddle in matters you do not understand." Alara did not flinch. She held Leora closer, rocking the child gently. "She is alive," she said simply. "That is what matters." Veilric's eyes, golden and intense, bore into her, searching, questioning. He could not deny the truth of what had just happened. Something in her touch had reached beyond the veil of life and death, a power he had thought lost, a force he had never seen in a mortal. "You must stay with her," Veilric said at last, his tone cold but restrained. "If she dies, you will answer to me." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She was both terrified and strangely relieved. To be close to Leora meant danger, yes, but also purpose. She had never felt so alive, so needed. The storm outside raged on, but within the small tavern a fragile calm settled. The child, Leora, nestled against Alara, her tiny hand curling around one of her fingers. The contact was light, almost weightless, but it carried a warmth that neither of them could explain. Veilric stepped back, his gaze lingering. "There is something unusual about you," he murmured almost to himself. "I will watch you. Do not think I will ignore what you have done." Alara met his gaze steadily. "I only did what any person would do," she said. "I could not leave her to die." Veilric's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps," he said, voice dropping to a whisper, "but some acts are more than mortal kindness. Some touch changes fates forever." For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind outside howled through the trees. Rain lashed against the windows, but inside the tavern, time felt suspended. A mortal girl and a vampire king, bound by an unspoken power, stood together with a fragile, newly awakened life between them. Alara felt something stir in her chest, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something unfamiliar, something dangerous. She did not know what lay ahead, only that life, death, and power had collided in a single heartbeat. The night deepened. Shadows stretched across the tavern like dark fingers. Veilric remained, silent but watching, his presence both suffocating and strangely magnetic. And Leora, now awake, turned her small head toward the mortal girl who had saved her, eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light like twin stars in the gloom. Alara held the child close, whispering again, almost instinctively, "You are safe now." But deep in the back of her mind, she knew this was only the beginning. The world beyond the tavern was vast, dark, and dangerous. And she, a simple mortal, had touched something far greater than she could yet understand. The first light of dawn would not come for hours, but already the shadows of a new destiny had begun to stir. And somewhere in the darkness, Veilric's golden eyes followed her every move, a silent promise that the fates of mortal and immortal had become inseparably entwined. The tavern door creaked, and the wind whispered against the windows. Outside, the fog thickened, curling toward the forest where unseen creatures stirred. Inside, a mortal girl held a vampire king's daughter, and the world, dark, ancient, and endlessly mysterious, waited for what would come next. And so, in the quiet hum of anticipation, the night held its breath. The castle of the vampire king Veilric rose from the mist like a shadow carved from stone. Its towers pierced the sky, dark as midnight, and its walls shimmered with frost even though the night air was heavy and damp. Inside, silence was more powerful than words. Every corridor, every echoing chamber, seemed to hold secrets older than the mortal world. Alara had never seen a place like this. She walked behind the guards, holding Leora carefully, her heart thudding with a mixture of fear and awe. The child nestled against her shoulder, quiet now, but occasionally blinking up at the towering ceilings and the flickering torches. Veilric led them into a great hall, its floor polished black marble, reflecting the glowing chandeliers overhead like pools of fire. Shadows clung to the corners, moving unnaturally, almost like living things. Alara felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, though the room was empty except for the king and his servants. "Leave us," Veilric commanded. His voice was low, echoing across the vast space. The guards hesitated, then obeyed. The doors closed with a resonant thud, sealing them in. Alara swallowed hard. She kept Leora in her arms, feeling the child's heartbeat calm against her chest, but Veilric's gaze did not leave her. "You should not have touched her," he said, voice steady but tinged with something Alara could not name. "Mortals do not hold such power." "I only did what I could," Alara said softly, holding the child tighter. "She was dying. She is alive now." Veilric's lips pressed into a thin line. "And yet you do not fear me." His golden eyes searched hers, piercing, intense. "Most mortals would have run, screaming." "I did not run," Alara said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Because I could not. Because someone had to be with her." The king's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. He studied her carefully, as if weighing the measure of her soul. "You are unusual," he said finally, "perhaps too bold for your own good." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. Bold, yes, but also afraid. The fear was there, wrapped around her chest like ice, and yet she could not let it show, not in front of him, not with Leora depending on her. "You must remain here," Veilric said, "for her safety. I will not allow her to leave my sight again, and you will stay with her." Alara's heart leapt. I will do whatever is needed." The king studied her for a long moment, then turned his attention to Leora. The child sat up slightly in Alara's arms, eyes wide and unblinking. They shone with an unnatural clarity, as if she could see through the stone walls, through shadows, through the very souls of those who watched her. "You awakened something in her," Veilric said, voice barely more than a whisper. "Something even I cannot control." Alara glanced down at the child. "I just whispered one word, live. That's all I did." Veilric's gaze hardened. "Words carry power," he said, "especially those spoken with the heart by one who does not yet understand what they possess. You have changed her fate, and perhaps mine as well." The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Alara felt the weight of his words, heavy as the stone beneath her feet. She had only meant to help. She had not meant to stir the currents of destiny that flowed through this ancient, dark place. Over the next few days, Alara remained in the castle. She slept little, always alert to Leora's movements, her tiny hands curling around hers, her delicate breathing a rhythm that kept Alara awake through the long nights. Veilric watched them from a distance, often silently, lingering in the hallways or standing in the shadows. There was a careful restraint in his gaze, but also a growing curiosity. He saw how Alara moved, how she cared for the child, how she did not shrink from the darkness that clung to the castle like a second skin. One evening, as the sky darkened and the torches flickered in the halls, Veilric approached Alara while she was tending to Leora's supper. The child sat on the table, nibbling at bread, and looked up at him with curious, unafraid eyes. "You are patient with her," Veilric said, voice low, almost reverent. "Few mortals could endure what you have endured in these walls. Most would break under the weight of shadows and whispers." Alara glanced up, meeting his gaze. "I do not want to break," she said. She needs someone, and I cannot let her be alone." Veilric's expression softened imperceptibly, though his golden eyes remained intense. "You speak as if her survival is your duty," he said. "Yet there is more than survival at stake. You have touched her life in a way that may change everything." Alara looked down at the child. Leora's small hand reached up, brushing against her chin. There was something unspoken in that touch, a spark, a connection, a silent promise. Alara felt it deep in her heart, a warmth she could not name, yet one that made her pulse quicken. "You fear nothing," Veilric said, his voice barely audible. "Not the darkness, not the power in these walls, not even me." Alara lifted her chin. "I fear what could happen to her," she said. "That is all I fear." Veilric studied her, his eyes lingering longer than necessary. There was something in her courage, something raw and untrained, that drew him despite himself. He turned away finally, though his gaze lingered on her as he left the room. Night came again, wrapping the castle in a shroud of quiet tension. Alara sat beside Leora's bed, reading from a small book she had found in the child's chamber. The child's eyes followed the letters, her small fingers tracing the lines as if she understood more than her age allowed. Outside, the wind howled through the towers, carrying with it whispers from the dark forests beyond. Creatures stirred in the shadows, but inside, the warmth of the small chamber offered a fragile comfort. Days passed, and Leora grew stronger. Her laughter, soft and musical, echoed through the halls, bringing a light that seemed unnatural in the dark castle. Veilric watched from his private chambers, his thoughts tangled with confusion and fascination. The child he had thought doomed was thriving, and the mortal girl who had saved her had become indispensable. Alara noticed Veilric more and more. She saw the subtle ways he moved through the castle, always near, always observing. She felt the tension in his presence, a mixture of danger and something she could not name. At times, she caught him staring from the shadows, golden eyes glinting, unreadable yet intense. One night, as a storm raged outside, Leora stirred in her sleep. Alara leaned over her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Lightning illuminated the chamber in sudden, stark flashes, casting shadows that danced along the walls. "Leora," Alara whispered softly. "It's only a storm. You are safe." From the doorway, Veilric watched silently, unseen by her. The way she spoke to the child, the tenderness in her voice, the quiet strength she radiated, it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Something within him stirred, a pulse long buried under centuries of power and fear. The wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, rattling the windows and shaking the chamber door. Leora's small hand twitched in her sleep, and Alara instinctively held her tighter. Veilric stepped closer, the shadows bending around him, his presence filling the room without a sound. "You have a strange courage, mortal," he said finally, his voice low. "Do you not fear what you have touched?" Alara turned, meeting his gaze. "I fear nothing that would harm her," she said. "Nothing else matters." Veilric's eyes softened, though the intensity remained. "Perhaps that is what makes you different," he murmured. "Perhaps that is why she lives." The storm outside reached its peak, rain lashing against the windows, wind rattling the stone walls. And within the chamber, three lives, immortal, mortal, and child, stood intertwined in a fragile balance. Suddenly, the doors to the chamber burst open. A figure cloaked in black had slipped past the guards, a shadow among shadows, moving with deadly precision. Veilric reacted instantly, his movements fluid and dangerous. Alara held Leora close, heart racing. "Who?" she whispered. "A rival," Veilric said, his voice tight. "One who would take her from me, one who does not understand mercy or love." The intruder's eyes gleamed in the darkness. The storm outside seemed to pause, holding its breath for what was to come. Veilric stepped forward, a dark silhouette against the flickering torchlight, his presence powerful and commanding. Alara felt her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the strange mixture of awe and something deeper. The mortal and the immortal standing together, ready to face the unknown, bound by the fragile life of the child in her arms. And in that moment she realized, her life and the life of the child had changed forever. The shadows of the night pressed close, and the future, uncertain, dangerous, and full of unspoken possibilities, waited for the dawn. The forest beyond the castle stretched endlessly, a realm of twisted trees and shadowed paths. Moonlight filtered through the thick canopy, casting silver streaks over moss-covered roots. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch, seemed to whisper secrets, as if the trees themselves held memories older than the kingdom. Alara held Leora close, her small hands clutching the mortal girl's sleeve. The child had grown stronger in the castle, but something in the forest called to her, an unseen force drawing her deeper into the shadows. Alara's heart thudded with worry. She did not know what lurked beyond the familiar halls of the castle, only that she could not let Leora face it alone. Veilric followed silently behind them. His presence was like a shadow cast by the moon, always near, always protective, yet impossible to predict. His golden eyes scanned the darkness, alert to every movement. For centuries, he had faced enemies, traps, and curses, yet the forest unsettled him in a way few things could. Perhaps it was the child, or perhaps the mortal girl who walked bravely in front of him, but something about this night felt different. "Stay close," Veilric said, his voice low and commanding. "The forest is not kind to the unprepared." Ilara nodded, tightening her grip on Leora. "I know, I won't let anything happen to her." The child's eyes glimmered in the moonlight, wide and curious. Leora seemed aware of the forest in ways Ilara could not understand. She pointed toward a distant glimmer of light, her small voice whispering, "This way." Ilara hesitated. "Are you sure, little one?" The child's gaze met hers with surprising determination. "Yes." Veilric stepped closer, his expression guarded. "Do not follow blindly," he warned. "The forest holds more than it shows. There are forces here older than kingdoms, older than you can imagine." Ilara swallowed her fear. She had faced darkness before in the streets of Eldoria and in the castle, but the forest felt alive, watching, judging. Still, she did not falter. She would protect Leora no matter what. As they walked deeper, shadows thickened and the air grew colder. The sound of leaves rustling and distant whispers filled the night, making Ilara's skin prickle. Leora, however, moved confidently, as if she belonged to this world as much as the forest belonged to her. Suddenly, a pale mist rose from the ground, curling around their feet. Veilric's hand went to the hilt of his sword instinctively, though he did not draw it. He trusted Ilara to remain calm, though the tension in the air made it difficult. "You sense it, don't you?" he said quietly, his gaze fixed ahead. Ilara nodded. "Something is here, something powerful." A figure emerged from the mist, cloaked and silent. Its eyes glowed faintly, red and unyielding. Ilara froze, instinctively shielding Leora. Veilric stepped in front of them, his body tense like a coiled blade. "Who dares enter this path?" Veilric's voice was calm but deadly. The figure's lips did not move, yet a voice filled their minds. "The child does not belong to the living nor the dead. She walks a path that could unmake the world." Ilara's heart raced. She had never heard anything like this before. Leora clutched her sleeve, seemingly unafraid, even curious. "What do you want from her?" Veilric demanded, his golden eyes blazing. The figure tilted its head. "She awakens what has long been dormant. The mortal who saved her carries the key to fate. Step aside or all three will be lost." Veilric's hands clenched at his sides. "I will not leave her. I will not allow anyone to touch her." The figure vanished into the mist, leaving a silence that pressed on their ears like stone. Veilric exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving the path ahead. Ilara tightened her hold on Leora. What was that?" she whispered. "A warning," Veilric said, his voice low, almost a growl. "She is not just a child, she is something far greater. And now, because of you, mortal, you are tied to her fate." Ilara felt a strange weight in her chest. She had only wished to save Leora, to give her a chance at life. But now, she realized that act had drawn them into a destiny far beyond her understanding. For hours they walked through the forest, the mist curling around them like fingers, the trees seeming to shift subtly in the corners of their eyes. Leora's small hand remained in Ilara's, and Veilric followed silently, a silent sentinel in the dark. Finally they reached a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. The mist hung low, shimmering like silver threads. Leora stepped forward, her small voice soft. "It's here." Ilara looked around. The clearing seemed ordinary, yet the air thrummed with a power she could feel in her bones. She knelt beside Leora, trying to steady the child. Veilric watched from a short distance, his body tense. "Do you feel it, mortal?" he asked. "The force here is ancient." One wrong step could awaken something we cannot stop. Alara nodded, swallowing her fear. I feel it, but we have to protect her. The child lifted her tiny hands, and the air seemed to shimmer around them. Alara felt a warmth pulsing from Leora, gentle yet strong. The child's eyes glimmered with a light that was neither fully human nor fully otherworldly. Veilric stepped closer, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. He could feel the power, too, deep in his chest. Something about the child resonated with him, stirring emotions long buried under centuries of darkness. You are extraordinary, Veilric said quietly, almost to himself. And perhaps so is she. Alara glanced up at him. His tone was not threatening, not commanding, but something softer, more vulnerable. She felt her heart quicken, a mixture of awe and unease. You care for her, she said softly, nodding toward Leora. Veilric's gaze followed hers. I have lived for centuries, mortal, he said, and yet in her I see a life that even I cannot control, and in you I see a courage I thought lost to time. Alara's chest tightened. There was a weight in his words, a sincerity she had not expected. I only want to keep her safe, she said. That is all I want. Veilric's expression softened. And yet in doing so you have bound yourself to her fate and to mine. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a cold, distant whisper. The trees seemed to lean closer, listening. Leora turned her head, sensing something beyond their sight. Someone is coming, Veilric said, his voice sharp now, commanding again. He drew his sword, its dark metal gleaming even in the pale moonlight. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine, but she did not step back. She had faced danger before in the tavern, in the castle, and now in the forest she would not falter. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing, slow and deliberate. Veilric's eyes narrowed. The air seemed to thrum with tension, the night holding its breath. Stay behind me, he instructed, placing himself between Alara, Leora, and the approaching figure. The shadow stepped forward into the moonlight, a tall figure, cloaked and silent, its face hidden beneath a hood. It carried no weapon, yet the presence it radiated was enough to make even Veilric tense. You walk paths not meant for mortals, the figure said, its voice echoing in the clearing. And yet you touch her life. Beware, the balance you have disrupted cannot go unnoticed. Veilric's grip on his sword tightened. She is under my protection, he said firmly. No one will take her. The figure tilted its head, a whisper of curiosity in its tone. Fate has chosen. The mortal has awakened the path. Choose wisely or all will be lost. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving the clearing silent once more. Alara exhaled slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. She looked down at Leora, who gazed at her with wide, unafraid eyes. The child seemed unaware of the danger that had just passed, trusting entirely in the mortal girl who had saved her. Veilric sheathed his sword, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. This is only the beginning, he said. The forest, the child, and now you, our fates are intertwined in ways neither of us can yet understand. Alara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had come to protect the child, yet now she realized she had stepped into a destiny that might demand more from her than she had ever imagined. The three of them remained in the clearing, the forest silent around them, save for the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. Leora's small hand curled around Alara's finger, a reminder of why they could not falter. You are not alone, Veilric said softly, almost to himself. And perhaps you never will be. Alara felt a warmth in her chest she could not explain, a mixture of fear, awe, and something more fragile yet stronger than anything she had known. She looked at the king, and in his golden eyes she saw a reflection of the bond she felt forming between them, one forged in danger, in care, and in the fragile light of hope. The forest held its secrets, ancient and deep, but for now they had survived. The night was far from over, and the shadows still whispered, but for the first time, Alara felt that she could face whatever came next. And somewhere in the darkness, a faint glimmer of destiny began to take shape, threading their lives together with a force older than kingdoms, older than time itself. The first light of dawn had not yet broken, but the sky was slowly bleeding from black to a deep purple, streaked with silver clouds. The castle stood silent, a fortress of shadows against the approaching day. Inside, Elara held Leora close, feeling the warmth of the child's small body against her own. The night had been long, filled with whispers, shadows, and the unknown. Veilric stood beside them, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. Even after centuries of rule, he felt the same tension he had felt that night in the tavern and in the forest. Something greater was approaching, something that would demand courage from all three of them. "Elara," he said softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You must be ready. What comes next will test you." Elara nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I am ready," she said. "For her, for Leora, I will do whatever it takes." The child stirred, lifting her small head to look at the mortal girl. Leora's eyes shone with a clarity that seemed impossible for one so young. It was as if she could see not only the present but the paths of the future twisting through shadow and light. "You are not alone," Veilric said again, his tone softer this time. "And perhaps that is what will allow you to succeed." The prophecy had been clear. Leora's life was tied to forces neither mortal nor immortal fully understood, and Elara, by saving her, had become part of it. A mortal courage intertwined with immortal blood, the key to breaking the curse that had haunted the child since birth. A chill swept through the halls, as if the shadows themselves had leaned forward to listen. Veilric's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, though he did not draw it. The danger was not of steel alone. It was older, deeper, and rooted in powers beyond any ordinary understanding. Elara held Leora tightly, whispering soothing words. "We will face it together," she said. "No matter what comes, we will not fall." Suddenly, the air thickened. Shadows twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that danced on the walls. From the far end of the hall, a figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, moving with a grace that was both terrifying and majestic. The figure's eyes glowed faintly, a deep red that seemed to pierce the soul. Veilric stepped forward, protective and commanding. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice resonating like a bell of warning. The figure's lips did not move, yet a voice filled the hall, echoing as if spoken by the shadows themselves. "The child's path is not yours to guard. Step aside, or all will be lost." Elara's heart raced, but she did not flinch. She held Leora closer, feeling the warmth and life within her. Somehow, she knew that their courage, their bond, was the strongest shield against whatever this force represented. Veilric's hand brushed hers, almost instinctively, grounding them both. The touch was brief, but it carried a weight neither could deny. For centuries, he had been alone in power, in immortality. And now, for the first time in countless years, he felt the fragile strength of mortal courage intertwined with his own. "You will not take her," Veilric said again, his voice firmer now, a warning carried by centuries of authority. The figure tilted its head, a whisper of amusement in its tone. "Then prove it. Show the strength that binds you. Only then will the path be clear." The shadows surged, rising from the walls and floor, twisting into shapes that seemed to move with intent. Elara felt a cold sweep over her, but she did not release Leora. Instead, she stepped forward slightly, letting the warmth of her heart and her voice rise against the darkness. "Leora, live," she whispered, her voice carrying through the hall like a fragile song. The child stirred in her arms, her eyes glowing brighter. A faint pulse of light radiated from her, soft but steady, as if life itself flowed from her small body into the room. Veilric watched, awestruck, as the shadows faltered at the light. The force before them recoiled slightly, testing, probing, but unable to penetrate the bond forming between mortal child and king. "You are stronger than you know," Veilric murmured, brushing a strand of hair from Elara's face. His tone carried a mix of reverence and something deeper, something long denied. Alara looked into his eyes, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. The danger was real, the stakes higher than anything they had faced, yet there was a connection that could not be broken, a courage that would not falter. The figure of darkness advanced again, but Leora's glow intensified, and the room was bathed in soft, silvery light. The shadows twisted and shrieked, their forms breaking against the combined strength of the child's power and the mortal's courage. Veilric moved to stand closer, his presence protective, his aura commanding the darkness back. "Do not falter," he said to Alara. "She is the heart of this, and so are you." Alara nodded, her resolve firm. She whispered once more to Leora, and the child's light flared, brightening until the shadows shivered and withdrew. Slowly, the darkness began to dissolve, retreating into the corners of the hall, leaving only silence and the faint glow of the child's life force. The figure in the distance let out a final, whispering sigh, fading into nothing. The threat was gone, but the hall still felt heavy with the weight of ancient power. Veilric knelt beside Alara and Leora. "You have done it," he said, voice low and full of wonder. "You have held fast when others would have faltered. The prophecy, it has not claimed us." "Not yet." Alara felt relief wash through her, a warmth that reached deep into her chest. She looked down at Leora, who blinked up at her with innocent, unwavering trust. The child's tiny hand reached out and touched her cheek, a gesture full of life and promise. "You are safe now," Alara whispered. Veilric's gaze lingered on her, golden eyes softening with emotions he had long hidden. "You have changed more than her fate," he said quietly. "You have changed mine." Alara's heart skipped. She did not fully understand what he meant, yet she felt the depth of it. For centuries, Veilric had been alone, a ruler of shadows and fear. And now, in the quiet glow of the dawn, he was something different. Less a king of darkness, more a guardian of life, shaped by mortal courage and the innocence of a child. The first rays of dawn crept through the tall windows of the hall, silver and gold weaving into the dark stone. Light filled the room slowly, washing over the trio like a promise. The castle no longer felt cold or oppressive. It felt alive, welcoming, as if even the stones themselves recognized the bond that had been forged here. Veilric rose, towering yet somehow humbled. "The path is not over," he said, "but for now we have survived. And perhaps that is enough to begin again." Alara looked at him, unsure what to say. Words felt too small for the weight of what had happened, but she did not need words. Her hand touched his briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared, of the courage they had found in one another. Leora stirred, her tiny voice soft and musical. "Safe." "Yes," Alara said, her voice steady and gentle. "You are safe." Veilric's gaze softened again, settling on the child. "And you," he said quietly, "will grow beyond the shadows that have haunted you. Because of her, because of you, there is hope." Alara felt warmth bloom in her chest. She realized that the journey had changed her too. She had come into the darkness as a mortal with nothing but courage and compassion, and she had emerged stronger, tied to the lives of two who now depended on her as much as she depended on them. The forest beyond the castle was quiet now, the night receding with the first light of morning. Outside, birds began to sing, a fragile melody that promised life and renewal. Within the halls, the shadows lingered, but they no longer carried menace. They were witnesses to courage, to loyalty, to love that had grown quietly in the dark. Veilric turned to Alara, his expression serious but tender. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together. Mortal child and king, bound by choice, by courage, and by life itself." Alara nodded, a gentle smile crossing her face. "Together," she whispered. The child laughed softly, a sound like bells in the morning light. Leora's hands reached out to both of them, touching the king's hand, then Alara's. In that simple act the bond was sealed, stronger than fear, deeper than shadows, and filled with the promise of what could be. Veilric looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in gold and crimson. "Dawn comes," he said softly, "and with it, a new beginning." Alara held Leora close, feeling the warmth of life and hope. The danger had passed, the prophecy had not destroyed them, and a new chapter was beginning. The forest, the castle, and the world beyond awaited, but they would face it together. The first light touched their faces, gentle and golden, and for the first time the night felt behind them. Shadows remained as they always would, but now they were not alone. Together they had survived darkness, faced the unknown, and discovered a bond stronger than fear, stronger than fate itself. And in that quiet, fragile moment, Alara understood what she had always felt but could not name. Courage, love, and hope could endure, even in the darkest of nights. The dawn spread across the land, a promise of life renewed, of destinies intertwined, and of a future still unwritten, but bright with the light of possibility.